10 years ago, the words movie and filmmaking would be immediately associated with Hollywood. Now we're seeing Georgia change that. As of 2016, Georgia has produced the largest number of feature films. Last year, they broke their own record by filming 366 productions. This includes popular movies and show series like Spider-Man, Stranger Things, and Jumanji. In 2021, women made up 25% of the film crews working on the top 250 grossing films. About 10 years ago, the percentage was 18%. While we've seen an improvement in numbers since then, there is still a lot of work to be done. In Atlanta, one of the fastest growing cities for film production in the world, females make up more than half of those graduating with film degrees. What's preventing them from entering or staying in the film industry? I asked 5 young women involved in this industry to share their opinion on the matter. Alyssa Johnson, a key costumer on the popular show Legacies, has worked in the film industry since 2019.
I am doing a lot of getting stuff ready to go to set, helping with fittings. I work a lot with the stunts and just kind of helping make sure everything runs smoothly. It's pretty logistical, but then also as key, it's just whatever needs to be done that's not being done, I'm the one helping make sure it's getting done.
Dr. Stephanie Young is an assistant professor of communication studies at the University of Southern Indiana. She researches and studies diversity in film and television.
Traditionally, I'm trained as a rhetorical scholar, and so I tend to do visual rhetorical criticism. And specifically, I am focused primarily in terms of pop culture and television and film, probably more television than film. But I'm really interested in the intersections of gender, race, and sexuality and the representation of those types of issues.
Rose Harvey has worked as first assistant director and other important roles in the music, commercial, and short film world.
I much prefer the commercial world, although I've been trying to get on a TV show or a movie, and I've done a few TLC shows, and I did a Sundance film, but not necessarily network shows or movies, which is what I think I'd like to try next.
Beth Kaiser is a former production assistant who worked with different studios.
So I basically worked on 2 TV shows, but I only worked on one, was a pilot for about a week, and then I worked on another TV show for about 5 months. And so that's the kind of where most of my experience comes from. I still love filming, and I still love, editing videos. I think it's really fun, and working in kind of that collaborative setting. And so ideally I'd love to work for a company filming videos for them, and that sounds really boring and corporate, but it's if you're still behind a camera, you're still making something fun, but you're working on a business hours, you're working a 9 to 5.
Sarah Neal worked on small film projects until creating her own videography business.
So basically, Maison Media offers photography and videography, and I have a network of other photographers and videographers that I hire to work with me regularly to provide full package services of photography and videography for events and weddings, sometimes documentaries. I really want to do that more. That's kind of where I'm headed to, but I absolutely love focusing on weddings.
All of these women studied some form of visual communications and hoped to be a part of the film industry in some way after graduation. As the titles on the set get more powerful, the number of women in these roles get significantly lower. In 2021, women made up 12.7% of the directors in the top 51 grossing films. Only 3 women have won Oscars for directing in the entirety of its existence. One of the biggest issues on set is the level of respect women receive. Rose Harvey doesn't feel that her male coworkers gave her the respect that her title deserved.
It was a very male-dominated company, very male-driven, and there was no female presence really aside from myself. And so I decided to leave there and, find my own way through the film world. And of course, with that internship, I had come across a lot of connections, met a lot of people, and was able to sort of kind of figure it out. But for a while there, I was pretty lost and not sure what to do or the next step. Being my age in the industry that I was, there's a lot of people who are more experienced than me and older than me. So it was really hard to get over that ageism sort of thing of thinking that, well, I'm too young, I don't understand things, and often being put in positions where people under me were older than me and being able to have that authority, being comfortable with it.
Sarah Neal ran into a similar issue when she was the first assistant director on set.
I personally felt that because I was super young and because I was a woman and because I had leadership roles within these positions, I was the first AD for a few productions. No one really wanted to listen to me. And I was one of the people that you had to listen to because the first AD runs everything. And because I was young and because I was a woman, no one really cared for what I had to say. And that really left a bad taste in my mouth.
The most female-dominated department on a film set is currently costuming, wardrobe, and casting, but issues still arise within that department. Even with the experience and higher titles Alyssa has received over the years, she still is not seen as an equal among her male peers.
So I have a pretty good, a lot of female representation for me. That being said, sometimes because we are the most female department, costume designers as a head of department traditionally are paid less than other heads of department that are male. So there's with the Costume Designers Guild, there's a push for pay equality for costume designers because they do a lot of work and it's as important as the work of the other departments and they're being paid less. Part of the higher ups are still a boys club, and so it's kind of like if you're the female coming in there, it's kind of like they might not take you as seriously, and then you kind of have to assert yourself in there and be like, no.
These women witnessed the little representation of females in higher jobs on set.
For that TV show, there were 3 different directors over the course of those, 8 episodes or so. And one of them was a woman, and none of the cinematographers were women, but there were like 2 women on the camera team. And so I thought that was really cool. Both of them were really nice. And then for the production staff, so like for the production assistants, we were pretty evenly split, men and women. And then kind of in the higher up production, like the second ADs and the ADs were kind of split pretty much evenly, men and women. But then once you kind of got higher up, it was like, the assistant director was a man, and the head of the camera department was a man, and the head of, pretty much the head of all the departments were men.
I really didn't take account for, gender in anything. And like, I never really, I knew it was an issue, but I guess people never really know of what an issue is until you're put in that position yourself. And so I guess being female in a very male dominated industry was also a challenge, because oftentimes you're the only, especially in the music video world, you're really the only female, aside from like a female who is the few female that are in art, or like the one female that is in the camera department. That was a big challenge because I really felt alone, and being okay with being sometimes the only woman and not letting that stop me, not using that as an excuse of why I can't get forward. Not that people do, but not letting that, kind of cloud put me under or prevent me from progressing. But thankfully, the commercial world has a lot more females than I was thought that there would be. I mean, there's a lot more, not of course nearly as enough as there could be, but yeah, there's a lot more, which made me feel a lot better.
Out of the 4 women that I talked to that have worked in the film industry, only one still does. The other 3 have explored different businesses or industries related to videography. What factors led to them leaving the industry they had studied to go into? One point that was consistently mentioned among these women was the stress and workload of the job.
I did not enjoy being a production assistant. There were moments that were a lot of fun, and there were days that were, but over the whole experience, it wasn't so great. And that's kind of like a multi-tiered problem, because I feel like being a production assistant, full stop, is just a really awful job. And like, honestly, I really think it really needs to change. I brought a book with me about, being a production assistant and like the rules and stuff like that. And in the book, and I kind of thought they were exaggerating a little bit, but they really are not. They're like, rule number 1, you are not allowed to sit down. And that is absolutely true. I would be working like a 16-hour day, and I had to be standing the entire 16 hours. And like maybe I'd get, the hour for lunch to sit down, but there was one day where I was helping with the actors get their lunch, and like, I was rushing around making sure they were fed and that the food that I was giving them was warm, and so I had to be quick about it. And we only had like an hour break, and by the time I got my food and sat down, I literally had 2 minutes to eat. And so I sat for 2 minutes, I shoved as much food in my mouth as I could, and then I got up and kept working for another like 8 or 9 hours. And so it was just really, really hard. And then I would be on set and I would look at other people and like look at the jobs that I wanted to do. Like I wanted to go into set deck, and I was looking at maybe the props person and just like anybody. And I was like, will I be happy in that role? You know, is it just being a production assistant? Because everyone hates being a production assistant, like it's the worst job. And then I was like, I don't think so. Like I was looking at them, and yeah, there were good moments and there were good days, but it's like they also seemed miserable. And so I was like, why am I like hurting myself physically, emotionally, to kind of go into a career that is gonna not be emotionally beneficial to me.
What I appreciate about commercial is that the women are in all of the higher positions. Like the crew is often more than not the men. Then you have like the producers, the PMs, the agency, and the client. They're usually a lot more female heavy, which is very comforting, you know, seeing that the women are all in higher power. Not that men can't either, you know, I appreciate both sides, but it's a lot more comforting to see a lot more women in these higher positions, especially like if it's a director or if it's a DP, that's the woman.
I worked on a number of small short films, and I really struggled with the stress and the misorganization that typically goes on when you're dealing with independent projects. The majority of the people that I worked with were lovely, but a lot of the time it was a lot of unpaid work that you didn't get proper recognition from, simply because when you're working in a really small independent film, everyone's just kind of trying to survive and trying to make it. And a lot of independent filmmakers work kind of outside of their limits. So my experience was, so I worked with people that were newer in the industry, but what happened was they had members that were bigger in the industry, but they would push their productions outside of the limits that they were really comfortable with. And so you're working with people that you really should be waiting to work with, or else you're going to get a bad taste in your mouth, because these people expect a certain amount of professionalism. They expect a certain amount of pay, of organization that simply isn't there because these people aren't experienced enough.
There are a lot of things that like happen because everyone is sleep deprived and stressed and being yelled at, and sometimes it's just the person, the culture is slowly getting better, but sometimes it's like, no, when no one has had sleep for 4 days in a row, like they might get a little snippy with you, and it's not necessarily you, it's whatever's happening in their personal lives and all of that, and just to continue to show up and work really hard. And I really think, especially in the Atlanta film industry, it's such a like small world that if you get a bad reputation for not being kind or a hard worker, then it'll get around faster. And I think in general in Atlanta compared to LA, people are kinder and nicer, because sometimes the LA people will come in and it's like, that's not how we talk to each other here. That's not how we treat each other here. So there's definitely a difference between that.
Another consideration was their future life goals. They raised concerns about their career and how it would affect them raising a family.
I remember this one woman, she had like a toddler, and she brought her toddler to the film set, and she said like, being a filmmaker, being a mother, being just a woman with a healthy work-life balance should not be something that's impossible. And it kind of is right now. And so they were kind of trying to fight for that kind of like, and I mean, it's really grown over the past 3 years, but they were like, we don't have to be filming for 16 hours. Like a 12-hour day is plenty of time. If anything, that's too much. Like a 10-hour day is plenty of time to film what needs to be filmed and still be able to come home to a family. And that's not even just like, you know, women need to be mothers, whatever, but it's like for fathers too. Like it's kind of unhealthy for a family to have someone work in film. And so they're really kind of trying to push for that kind of just like healthy work-life balance. I'm not married or anything, but I do want to eventually have children, and I could see how, I mean, right now, I mean, obviously we don't want things to be this way, but right now it is really hard to be a mother and work in film. And I was like, I would rather have children than work in film. And that's a decision I made as a single person. Like, I was like, I would rather, for my future children's sanity that don't even exist right now, I would rather be with them than work in film. And I was like, if that's a decision I feel in my heart that I'm gonna make in 10 years, I feel like I should make it now so that I can spend 10 years in a different career.
Like, there's also more of a stigma of like, one of my bosses has kids, and like trying to leave to take them to the dentist is like more expected of her than of her husband. And so just like traditionally. And so, but like if she takes off or tries to take off to go take her kid to the dentist, it's like, oh, what are you doing where with a guy taking off to go do whatever he's gonna do, it's not as big of a thing.
One of the biggest factors that have led to women leaving the industry is a lack of mentorship or connections. It can be difficult to see themselves in a job that is predominantly held by men.
I think the number one thing is that for folks to succeed, even when they get an education, even when they go into the industry, is that it really is about networking and mentoring. And so if you have the majority of folks who are, again, sort of white male, or even male, that type of mentoring doesn't happen usually cross-gender, you know? So that makes sense, that ends up being sort of a cycle of that you don't end up having really folks mentoring, and therefore folks don't have access, and therefore folks don't end up thriving in that industry. Even when you have women at the top of some of these companies, they don't end up providing the sort of mentoring or ways of supporting other women. It's almost, I worked really hard to succeed in this male-dominated industry, and so for me to be taken seriously, I'm not gonna really support other women. It's sort of, I've succeeded and that's enough. And that's a problem.
I think in general, as like the world slowly inches towards like better female representation, like the film industry is also like slowly doing it. And then even with like, we have had a lot of female directors come on, which is nice. And our show, our lead is a female, and she's the like strongest creature in the world or whatever. So we have I'm pretty lucky on the show I'm working on. I know other people who aren't as lucky with the shows they're on. So I am grateful for as many female leaders as we have had, from directors to talent to all of it. So I've been lucky, and hopefully it'll continue on that path.
I mean, the way it kind of works, it's like you're not always on the same crew every single time, but the head of the department like has their people. And so if, let's say, the cinematographer is hired on to work on this TV show, he's gonna bring in his guys, I'm from New Jersey, his people. And so that could be men or women, but it kind of just depends on the people he's made connections to, the people he's met, and it's like kind of nepotism in that kind of way. It's who you know and who you have connections to. And so it's like if he's made connections to women camera workers, he's gonna bring on those women camera workers. But if he never talks to them and never makes connections to them, then he won't bring them onto shows.
I never stuck around long enough to get my foot in the door of the bigger productions that are easier. And I think especially going into the last decade of the filmmaking trends with, when you're talking about bigger production, TV and film, that is a whole different monster that kind of takes a long time to get into. And I didn't have the patience for that. Being a full-time video freelancer takes a lot of patience and a lot of connections that at the time I didn't have. And so I was quick to move on to that and establish myself in a different genre of photography and videography.
I think it's people speaking up now. Before, I've been put in positions where I just didn't say anything because I'm like, well, if I say something, they're in a higher power than me, they could fire me. I think it's that sort of thing. And I think now people just don't care. You know, there's a lot more technology. There's a lot more kind of evidence that you can have to support your say. And I think with that, I think women just have a better support system in society to be able to speak up and say things that they see that aren't right. And I think that's why it's a big thing. And I think also it's just people coming out, as well as like the Me Too movement, as the Harvey Weinstein thing. You know, I think that has a big thing about it. You see one person speaking up and then you're finally like, oh, well, now I'll speak up. And not even in regards to like that whole Me Too thing, but just in regards to like unequal pay and not being treated the same, and seeing this person get better opportunities even though you're on the same skill level. And it's like, why can't I also have that opportunity? I think people are just getting tired of it. You know, I think people are just now finally speaking up. People just, you know, I mean, it's either lose your job or lose your dignity. And I think people now are just tired of how things were and how things are, and wanting to make things better, you know.
The number of women on film crews is increasing slightly, but until we do more about the working hours, family stigma, and lack of mentorship and connections, we may never see a balance between genders.
In general, I think we're on the right track. I think the union push for better hours and all of that stuff is just helping everyone in general. But like, there's still a ways to go. But with the pandemic happening, it's like we came back and we are working like a little bit less hours. At least some on the office side, and then sometimes still not. Sometimes you're still working crazy hours, but they were like, oh, for your health, we're gonna let you like go home and get sleep. And it's like, yeah, we could have been doing this for years.
The great thing about this industry is that it'll never die. People need entertainment, you know, music, this, and sports. They'll never die. Where I see it heading is there are still like the biggest producers, biggest directors are, you know, men, but I think now it'll definitely start being more diverse, and more opportunities will show themselves.